Good morning, everyone. This is Earl Burkett. I'm uh, First of all, I want to thank everyone who took the time to attend my mother's funeral. Uh, she would have been the first to be thankful and grateful to everyone who showed up to see her homecoming. There's much that I want to say about my mother uh, in the minutes that have been granted to me, and I hope that you'll bear with me as I reflect on many of the things that have been on my mind to speak to uh, you about her. My mother, Queenie Burkett, almost lived to be 100. Her birthday would have been in May, and I had an entirely different plan laid out for her celebration of her birthday. I had planned to fly down to see the family and to be with her as she celebrated her 100th year. And it was going to be a glorious occasion. Um, However, it was not meant to be as she passed away 2 weeks ago. So I was not given the opportunity to see her off. Uh, it Life has a way of throwing you curves that you don't expect. And it had never occurred to me that I would be delivering her eulogy in February. Um, it's a bittersweet moment for me because there are many things that my mother represents that I want to reflect on. And it's difficult in the limited time that I have to lay out all the things that I want to say about her. Uh, so I'm going to basically limit it to what I think her life was all about and the themes that she represented in her life. The two themes which were most important to her were love and her Christian faith, as reflected not by words or meaningless words, but deeds. Um, she is a living reflection of what love and faith were. Uh, I'm going to start off by giving you a little bit of background on her life and why I think she turned out to be the type of person that she was. I decided to film this in downtown Jersey City, which is where I live, um, at Exchange Place. What you're seeing in back of me is New York City, and that's where my mother and father first met in Brooklyn, and that's where their life together began. I understand that they met on the street in Brooklyn, and on their first date, uh, he was a machinist, and I guess he had a weekly paycheck. On their first date, when they went out to dinner, he didn't have enough money to pay the bill, so she wound up paying. Uh, what was life like for my mother? What was she like? Well, she was born in 1923 in a little town, a little area. I'm not even sure it's a town anymore, called Gray, Virginia. It's in Sussex County near Emporia. Uh, I once went down there when I was a little boy, when I was around 12 or 13. And the area where I saw the house where she grew up in, I actually stayed overnight in that house with my grandmother, Mammy Taylor. And 10 children were raised in that house by her mother, my grandmother, Mammy. And it was a very small house. Some people might describe it as a shack. It was a very meager existence, let's put it that way. And I can understand, it's a little windy out here. I can understand that life was really tough for her and for the family. They really didn't have that much money. They didn't have any money at all. And life for a black family, particularly a black woman in the 1920s and 30s, when she grew up, was very difficult. I doubt whether she was able to finish, even went to high school, much less finished it. But I do know that she was self-taught. She was basically self-educated. She did not have the benefit of the education that her children had and her grandchildren. Uh, it was a different time. It was a time of segregation, Jim Crow in the South, separated public facilities, drinking fountains, bathrooms. And it was an era where she had to grow up in an area where there were lynchings of black men. And there was a Ku Klux Klan. The Klan was marching in Washington, D.C., not far from where she grew up. Um, it was a difficult existence, hard to describe to an audience today because none of us have had to experience what she went through. And I fully understand um, why she wanted the finer things in life as she grew older. Um, the flamboyance in dress and wanting to have nice things, cars and jewelry. It all grew out of her background, her desire to make life better, not only for herself, but also for her children. The defining theme of my mother's life was that she never really just thought only of herself. She always thought of other people and how she could make life better for them. She took care of uh, her brothers and sisters when she was growing up. She had to take over on certain occasions because her father, had died at an early age when she was a child. So she had to take on more responsibility than she normally would have. Later on, she had two children. Um, my half brother and sister, Gloria and William. And she had them at an early age, and she was a single mother who had to raise these two children on her own without much assistance. Because in those days, they didn't have welfare programs, things of public assistance that we have today. She had to take care of them and work at the same time. She came up to Brooklyn, which is right over my shoulder, because she saw better opportunities for herself than she would have had in Virginia. And as fate would have it, that's where she met my father, Earl Burkett. Um, their backgrounds, though very, very dissimilar, there are certain similarities that I guess drew them together. Um, my father is background is from the West Indies, from the island of Barbados, and his parents immigrated to this country uh, at Ellis Island, which is I'm looking over my shoulder over here. Um, just before World War One, around 1915, and they settled in Harlem. And his father had it a little bit better. He was a landlord, and he was also a missionary. But he was by no means wealthy. He did not come from a wealthy family. He too had to work for everything that he ever got in life. And I guess the both of them were in sync with one another because they were both people who came from very little in their backgrounds, at least financially. They came from strong families in terms of faith, um, but they had to work for everything that they ever got. And I guess there was a spark between them, even though she's from a different culture than he was. They had there was a bond there, and that was difficult to describe. And it was a bond that lasted 60 years. It's difficult to understand what unions were back then and how once you married someone, you stayed married for life. You didn't divorce. You They believed very strongly in households where there was a mother and father to take care of the children. And I had the benefit of having a strong mother and father in Queenie and Earl Burkett, as did my brother and sisters. The she the basic theme of her life, as I want to point out though, is not that she was thinking of herself. She was always thinking of other people, which is why she took in her family when they needed help. All of her brothers came up north. In those days, back in the 30s, in order for rural Virginia black families to survive, they often had their sons come up north to do work seasonally, similar to what um, migrants in California when they have the planting season. But in those days, they came to Long Island to pick potatoes in Hicksville and Suffolk County. 'Cause Long Island back in those days was largely potato fields before it became suburbs. And the brothers came up to pick potatoes, and that's how they earned money to take care of the family back home in Virginia. Evidently, she had the same thing in mind when she came from Virginia to Brooklyn. When she and my father got together, they started out in a small apartment in Brooklyn, and they lived to survive there for a number of years where they raised four children. Uh, he became stepfather to her children, Gloria and William, and they had three children of their own. Two of them in Brooklyn. One was my older sister, Orlando, who was born in Brooklyn, and my older brother, Lamont, who I never got to meet because he died before I was born at the only age of 2, pneumonia. He was born in Brooklyn a year later. And you all know the story of how my father became a success in his field, in his profession. So I won't go into that. I will only say that the prosperity that he was rewarded with for his efforts enabled him to buy a house for his family on Long Island. They were narrowed it down to two locations. One was Westbury. They looked at Westbury very seriously. But what they did, they settled on a newly built house, split level home in Lakeview, which was also in Nassau County on the South Shore. And architect friend Hamilton Grain designed the house for them. And they moved into the house in 1958. They had gotten a mortgage on the house, which was very rare for a black family to get a mortgage in 1958 in that particular suburbs. And as you know, as some of you may know that I have written about, um, Lakeview and Long Island in general in the late 50s was quite segregated. Um, Lakeview in 1958 was a mostly white community. And when they moved there, they were one of about four families on the block that they moved on, Pinebrook Avenue. The other families being the Covingtons, the Hawkins, the Gills, the Warlickses, and I believe the Harrisons were the first of the black families to move into these newly built houses on Pinebrook Avenue. And it was while they were at Pinebrook Avenue that I was born at South Nassau Communities Hospital in Oceanside in 1960. And my whole life is centered around um, suburban Long Island. And that's where I grew up, the house in Pinebrook Avenue. And my mother made sure that all of her children had everything that they needed to make them uh, resourceful and strong and able to stand on their own 2 feet when they grew older. She made sure that we had the right education, the right schools, that we did everything that we needed to do to become as productive and have all the opportunities afforded to us as black children in the 1960s and 70s. Um, they encountered racism wherever they went. There were signs on the lawns that said, you know, basically, nigger, go home. Did they buckle into the racism? No. It only made them more determined to make a life for themselves and their families. And not only my family, but all the other families had that same level of determination. And it worked out because within a few years, Lakeview became an all black community, a nearly all black community of prosperous middle class families. And it was all due largely to the efforts of my mother, especially, and other mothers like her. There's a word I'd like to say about women of her era. Today, we have mostly women who are career into their careers, into their professions, and they tend to look down on women like my mother who chose to become housewives and mothers at an early age and to devote their lives to raising families. Uh, there, that is not the way that my mother's generation saw themselves. They saw themselves as women who thought more of other people than they did of themselves, of the comfort of other people. I can remember when we had Thanksgiving dinners, everybody ate around the dinner table except for one person, and that was my mother. And I always asked her, Mom, why don't you come join us at the table with the rest of us? And she would not do that. She was content to sit on the stairs and watch us eat and to enjoy ourselves because that's the type of person that she was. Other people came first before she did. neither one of my parents cared about money. My father, though successful, um, and he had nice things. Everybody knows about his customized Cadillac Eldorado, and the sharp suits he used to wear, and the dinners and the house parties. Everybody's aware of that background, but that's not what motivated them. What really motivated them, well, what motivated my father was his work. He loved what he did. He loved to invent. That was his love. He would spend 24 hours a day sometimes and never come home because he loved to design and invent the machines that fed his family for the sake of being an inventor. That's what most creative people are like. My mother, she gained enjoyment uh, from when she had money, giving it to others and to make their lives better. I have untold stories of people that she would slip a 20 or 30 into their hands when she greeted them. She knew that they were having trouble. And even though at times she didn't have much money, in later years, find my business reversals from my father, she would always find a way to find the money to give to other people who were not as fortunate. And there were times where she just liberally gave uh, money that she really could have used for herself. Uh, that was just the type of person that my mother was. Uh, she, um, not to say that she didn't have her own dreams and desires. She did start her own business. Uh, when I was in high school, it was a fashion store and a beauty salon in Lakeview, Queen Bee's Fashion. And I was the one that helped her come up with putting together the business, drawing up the business papers. And even though the business did not succeed, it lasted for about 2 years. That was her dream, and she did make it. She did realize it. And she did make it become true. She loved to do fashion shows. She loved to put on fashion shows. And I remember the fashion show she used to have in the backyard of our house, where she introduced. She was one of the first people to introduce fashions from the Caribbean, West Indies, and also from Africa. She was, I think, the first person in Lakeview to wear a dashiki, and this was in the late 60s. Everybody remembers her light up earrings. She introduced light up earrings. She would attend the West Indian Day Parade every every year, um, and she also loved her family, the Taylors, particularly her brother Howard Taylor, Uncle Howard, we call Dot. He raised her daughter, his daughter, Pam Williams, and when she was a teenager, and she also loved going to football games when her brother JD was the head football coach. I believe it was at Grambling. She would often come out to Jersey, where I live, and go to the Meadowlands Stadium to watch them play the HBCU game every year. I believe it was in September. That was an annual thing that she made sure she went to and wanted to go see. She was probably the most active person in the family in terms of um, going out and meeting people. She was a joiner. She was a member of everything. The Eastern Stars, Women's Sorority. She was a member of. She was a a den mother in the Cub Scouts when I was in the Cub Scouts. She was our den mother. She was a deaconess or an usher in Shiloh Baptist Church, and she was very active in the civil rights movement back in the day when the marches were taking place all over the country. She was the one who took her family, myself, and my sister and my father. I didn't know this until years later. She took us to Washington when Martin Luther King gave his "I Have a Dream" speech on August of the 28th of 1963. The Burkett family, was in that audience. I hadn't realized it at the time because I was only 3 years old, and I was the only thing I remember of that trip was running around the Washington Monument with my sister Alanda chasing me. But yeah, we were at that march. There were many other things that she done. One of the things that I wanted to point out was her the achievement she made back in 1973 on Pine Brook Avenue. In those days, Pine Brook Avenue was a gravel road, and it was not paved, and there were a lot of accidents that occurred on Pine Brook, and it needed to be repaved. The street needed to be paved. However, the local politicians would not do it, and so my mother took it upon herself to go to one of the town council meetings, the town of Hempstead, and petition to have um, Pine Brook Avenue paved. Because she was a housewife, most of the local politicians laughed at her because she was a housewife, she was black, etc. Did she give up? No. Uh, what she did is she went door to door. She got a petition, and she got everyone in this neighborhood of Lakeview to sign the petition. And the next time she went to the town council meeting and showed them all the petitions and all the people who were prospective voters, the very next day they paved Pine Brook Avenue. The reason why Pine Brook Avenue was paved these days is because of the street fight that my mother performed. That's just one of the many things that she did for Lakeview. And I could go on and on about that. Just that one subject of what she gave to that village. Uh, my mother's done many, many things for me of a personal nature, and I won't go into those because they're so personal that those are memories that will stay with me forever. I'm just going to bring up one incident that occurred when I was 18 years old, and I went off to college in Vermont. And when you're 18, you're very unformed and you're very unsure of yourself, and it's kind of a lonely period. And I'm with a bunch of strangers, most of whom are, I went to a college that was very elite. It was kind of a college where there were very rich people, very privileged people who attended, and you could feel a little self conscious in that environment as an 18-year-old coming from a public high school on Long Island in a working class community like I went to in Malvern. Um, and they had a Parents' Day, Parents' Weekend at the college I went to. And I had was hoping that somebody from my family would come up to see me during this weekend because all the other students had their parents come up, and they were coming up in these fancy cars, and they had the credit cards out. And this is the late '70s, and lo and behold, there was one family member who did come up and see me, and that was my mother. She rode the bus, she got on a bus, and she went all the way up to Middlebury, Vermont, um, to see her son on Parents' Weekend. She stayed with me the entire day because it was only one day. I believe it was a Saturday. We went out to have dinner. We spent the entire day together. We had a lovely time. And after all that, she took the bus back home. It was a 400-mile trip. And she did all of that just to see me, her son. I never forgot that. And uh, it's been 45 years, and I never forgot that. And I never will forget that. My mother, in her final years, unfortunately had contracted dementia, which began just before she left Long Island to live with her nephew and his family in Raleigh. My father had also been in decline in his health at the same time. And, the business had long since become not anywhere near what it was in its heyday back in the 1960s and early 70s. And they had both been in physical decline, and it showed. And it was at that point that they were taken in by their grandson, Clifton. And the past 13 years, he took care of them. It is not easy to take care of an elderly person in their 90s who have dementia. I couldn't begin to understand what it's like because I never had to take care of my own children. I never had children. I never got married, much less take care of an elderly couple. And for him to do this, in addition to taking care of his own children, and also with the assistance of his then wife Katrina, who I also want to give props to because they both of them went above and beyond what they could have done. And Clifton and Katrina, you will forever be uh, I will forever be in your debt for what you have done for my parents in their final golden years. You gave them a dignity and pride that they never would have had in any other instance. And for that, I believe you'll be blessed. Uh, that's what it means to love someone, to care about someone. Uh, it's not just a word that you toss around that has no meaning. There are many people today who call themselves Christians. And I was brought up to believe that you went to heaven if you repented of your sins and accepted Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. And you would instantly gain admission to heaven. Um, I had a talk with my mother not long before she left uh, Lakeview to go to Raleigh, and we had a discussion on faith and what it meant to be a Christian. And my father, he leaned more towards the repentance side, acceptance of salvation. That was more of his thing. My mother had a different view of what a Christian was. And we had a discussion on this. We actually had an argument about that because I leaned more towards my father at the time. But her view of Christianity was not just being acceptance of Jesus as your Savior, but also through works and setting an example in your life that is reflective of the teachings of Jesus. That's what she wanted to tell me, her son, that don't just think that you can get a get out of jail free card just by your belief. Act on your belief. Become more Christ-like. Be more compassionate. Be more tolerant. Try to understand people more. I didn't quite get it at the time. I was maybe in my late 40s, as I said, just before they went to Raleigh. It wasn't until about 3 years or so later, when I was 51, that I finally got what my mother was trying to tell me. And how I got it the hard way. I got it through illness. When the time came where trouble hit me physically, the worst trouble that I've ever had in my life, where I was struggling to survive and didn't know that I was going to wake up the next day, when I lost the use of my kidney and the use of my legs when they were amputated, and I had to draw on a strength that I never thought I'd have. That changed me in ways that I never thought they would. I became a different person, and I owe it largely, in fact, I would say I would owe it almost entirely to my mother. Because when I was lying in a hospital bed, unable to move, unable to clean myself, I thought, how am I going to get through this? And then I said to myself, there is one person whose example I could use of how they got through it, and that is my mother, because she was the strongest person I knew, and she got through all of the horrible things that she had to endure in her life, and drawn a strength to get through the childhood that she had and to raise the family that she had. And I said to myself, if she can go through all of that, then I can go through all the suffering that I'm going through right now. And because of that, I fought, became stronger, and although I'm not completely well yet, I'm better because I thought of my mother and knew that in the back of my mind, she's saying, Earl, I know that you can do this. And I know that all the things that I taught you, you're going to have to draw on them now. And now that she's gone, as now that both of them are gone, I can still hear her say, Earl, I'm not here anymore. And I, I taught you everything that you need to know. You're going to have to do it on your own right now. Just remember, I'm here to love you and to always do your best in whatever you do from now on. So, Mom, you've gone on, but I want you to know that you trained me well. I learned everything that you told me, and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that I adopt all of the teachings, all the lessons, and all the love and all the compassion that you've shown me towards others, the same way you did, for the rest of my life. I want to thank all of you for listening to me on my musings on why I will miss Queenie Louisiana Taylor Burkett. Mom, I wish you all the best. Thank you for coming, and God bless you all.